My name's Jen Williams. I'm a software developer and a data consultant at Network Planet. I build linked data tech, and this is Matt Wallis from the Institute of Solidarity and Economics. We met for the first time yesterday. We haven't worked on a project together or anything, but we share an interest in linked data. So Matt is going to talk about the linked data approach that they have at the Institute, and there is handouts here if you would like retro analog paper copies, but also there's a link if you'd like to get it online. It's basically the content of the session plus a few bits of extra information, is it?
Yeah, this talks about linked open data for the solidarity economy. I'm Matt Wallis from the Institute for Solidarity and Economics. And there's going to be three little sections here. We're first going to talk about who we are, and why we're looking into data. The next section's a bit more detail, but there's only a limited time for detail in this, and what we've actually been up to and finding some conclusions. So the Institute for Solidarity and Economics, our aim is to support the solidarity economy movement through education, research and finding opportunities for collaboration. And what we mean by the solidarity economy is grassroots movements that build a fair and ecological alternative to capitalism. Hopefully that sums up in a nutshell. So that includes things like community, as well as co-ops, although not all co-ops, things like community-supported agriculture, transition towns, local initiatives that aren't incorporated, they're just groups of people doing local housing work or environmental work. So it includes a lot of things. If you want to find out more about the solidarity economy, we've got a table shared with Stir magazine down in the Great Hall. So next question, why data? I'm going to make this very short. I mean, data fuels the World Wide Web. We're all very aware of how much people are talking about data and the importance of data. I'm talking mostly not about personal data, which there are particular issues to do with, but data in general. There's vast amounts of it. About a year or so when we started looking into this sort of stuff, loads of people come up to us saying, so what is the solidarity economy? Like, where is it? How do we discover it? So there's a big demand for geographic maps on which these initiatives within the solidarity economy are visible. And of course, every map needs data. And in the same way, exactly the same way, the sort of apps that people are talking about at this conference, they all need data. Data's the underpinnings of all of the technology, the software technology that sits on top. So we kind of figured that we decided this is a really important thing to look into. And it fits with our aims of research, education, and collaboration. As I say, the starting point for us was looking at how we describe initiatives within the solidarity economy. There's a lot of non-technical things to do with data. Data represents power. If you've got a concentration of data in a particular monolithic place, then there's power in that. So we're very conscious that you need to be careful about not designing technology which accidentally starts creating those power structures. So it's really important to have distributed data, not centralised data, or at least to allow people to choose to have distributed data, and appropriate ownership of data. And kind of what I mean, an example of this is you want to leave data with the people who are best able to support it and maintain it. You don't want to start making copies of yourself. I mean, a good example of this is weather forecasts. So if you took a screenshot of a weather forecast as your data for weather, it's not going to be very useful for next day. Whereas if you have a link to the data, link to the Met Office's website, that is much more useful for getting weather forecasts. Trust is also a vital thing. You need to have a system where you understand who is saying what. It's not just what is being said. You need to be able to refer back to who is claiming that to be true. So these are kind of social issues.
Spreadsheets is a form of tabular data. You might have tabular data in like relational databases as well. And are people happy with the term CSV? Does anyone need the language CSV? So CSV is just a format of tabular data, comma separated values. It's a way of, it being a non-proprietary way of sharing tabular data. You have a load of headings, all comma delimited, and then the next row is the values, and you can show it in a table. So to go the next level up with linked data, once you get into linked data, we take that tabular data, and the structure of linked data, it doesn't need to have those headings at the top. The tabular data needs to exist in its table for you to understand what those values are. You need those column headings. When we turn it into linked data, we embed those column headings into the data itself, which means you can merge the data more easily. So I would have got a few questions, but we'll leave them till the end, and we'll just go straight into the next part, which is more about the journey.
Having decided we wanted to look into this, as well as the social guiding principles, the sort of engineering guiding principles, to use existing best practice and to reuse wherever we can software, data models, which for all the software engineers in the audience, this will be kind of bread and butter to them. And open source is really important to us. Using open source software and making everything we do available as open source. Things are linked to our GitHub on that handout. So sort of entered a research phase, and linked open. What I mean by linked open data is not a general concept of open data like a spreadsheet that you make available that's got URLs in it as links. What I'm talking about specifically is the stuff put forward by Tim Berners-Lee and all the standards that were then generated from the World Wide Web Consortium out of that work. So that's when I talk about linked open data, I'm referring specifically to that. And when you look at those standards, it's a bit scary. There's a lot of information in there, and so in order to understand that better, we felt the best course of action was actually to start actively doing something with it. So we decided to publish a data set and use that data set on a little map application. So Co-ops UK have made available for the last couple of years a spreadsheet, a CSV file, or a couple of files that have all of the co-ops in the UK with some basic data about them, including things like their postcode and their name and various stuff like this. So we decided to use that as a resource to look at converting that into linked open data and to deploy that in a way that's available on the web as open data, and put that stuff on the map and document it. There's a trail of documentation that we've been leaving behind about what we've been up to, which we hope will be a useful resource for others and educate, which I guess is this, hopefully. So the map application that we wrote is for anyone familiar with OpenStreetMap's leaflet. It's based on that. It shows them the co-ops on the map. The data is loaded by doing a query of our openly deployed linked open data. And it provides links to other data sets. So the Ordnance Survey, for example, these are the best people to have information about the geography of this country. So we have a link to there. We don't copy information about geography, we have a link to it. In the same way, Companies House has information about company registrations and the line of business they're in, and accounts, various other things, and we have links to that. And there's also educational material which, if you play with this app, you will run into. So when you load it up, it looks like this, and all those numbers represent a whole bunch of co-ops that have been summarised by a number of the survey. You could watch me click away to zoom into things, but to save you that, here's one I prepared earlier where I've already zoomed in. We're now looking at London, and here's a co-op called the Art Zone Cooperative, for example, and these things look like and are standard links to documents. So, for example, there's a link to geographic information. And because we're in a browser, I'm in a browser, we're in a browser. So I click the link to geographic information, and because I click that link in a browser, it's showing me a document that is designed for humans to read. And you will see it's got useful things there like the latitude and longitude of this particular postcode. Now, the Co-op's UK dataset didn't have latitudes and longitudes in it, but we want to put stuff in a map. So we go to the best source of information for geographic information, the Ordnance Survey, and get it from there. But I will get onto that in a second. Similarly, there's a link to Companies House, which I won't go into the details of. The next link here, what this does is this runs a very small PHP script for the techies here, which does a Sparkle query, which, ignore that if you don't understand that. It's written by my colleague Dan at the end there. This is telling me that the companies in the same line of business that are near to that Art Zone co-op. So this is an example of how you leave the data with appropriate ownership and you pull it in order to generate what is essentially new information. Whoever knew before we put those data sets together that this was the list of companies in the same line of business that are near to the Art Zone. I mean, this is just one minor demonstration of the power of links and the power of leaving the data where it's best suited to be. So we looked at links to the web of documents, but there's a parallel thing going on here, which is the web of data, which allows, it's not designed for human readable information, it's designed for machine readable information. And that's what was being used when we fired up that little application to show similar companies nearby. So that's the web of data. So just to elaborate on that in a different diagram. So our data contains links to other data sets. For example, a link to our Ordnance Survey data, and the links actually look like these, familiar from the URL bar in your browser. They are HTTP URLs. And links to Companies House data. Our map application drew information from the OS data in order to get latitude and longitude, and our data in order to get other information. And that shows similar companies nearby was launched by our map application and drew information from two other data sets.
The power of this is when people continue to add into that web of data. So the data, each of your organisations or individuals, you publish the data that you want people to know about your organisation or co-op or whatever, and as you publish it in this way and onto the web of data, that then adds in exactly the same point that Matt was making about we leave the data with the experts. If it's a food co-op, you might want to publish data about where your food comes from, and so on and so forth. And because we're using a standardised way of sharing this data, it all starts popping up on those maps because you put the links between it. So that's an example of what is out there with the data sets, but the power of it is when we adopt these standards and publish the data ourselves. So that's what I'd like people to go away doing, is publish more. Don't put it into some website. I mean, do put it into a website if you want. There's many websites out there saying, if you give us all of your data, we're going to then show it on our, it's basically driving their website. Instead, distribute it. Publish your data directly yourself, and then allow the technologies to be developed to go and crawl and show even more useful information on apps like that.
Are we saying we should use linked open data everywhere? No. I mean, this, if you want to look at more, that link takes you to some really well-written summaries of different levels of open data. The fact that it's open at all is great. The fact that Co-ops UK made their data open in a CSV file enabled us to then, the 5-star stuff is linked open data at the top. So that enabled us to take that data set and kind of ramp up its star rating. But publishing it is a really good start. So just to talk about our experience looking at linked open data, because there's a huge amount of work, very good quality work's gone into it, and you realise once you start delving into it that there are answers to questions you didn't yet know to ask, which is the same as reusing software. If you're lucky, you'll find that too. You're gaining the benefit of all the clear thinking that's been done before you. So there is a hurdle in understanding that stuff, but the benefits, I think, outweigh that. I've mentioned before, it enables appropriate ownership of data, Audit Survey owns geographic information, etc. Met Office owns weather. This next chunk of stuff I've shown there, these are kind of technical points that I'm not going to go through now, but there are many technical reasons why I've found this solution to be, well, I haven't found anything that does all of these things. Lots of other solutions do some of them, but this ticks a whole load of boxes. There is a highly online? I'll try that again. Highly knowledgeable online community who've certainly helped me in working out how to do this stuff. And something else I want to point out, through their help, in producing this data set, I haven't created anything new in terms of data models. I've just reused what's been out there. And again, as well as, what I've found is that those data models have been some of them incredibly well thought out, but have only been able for me to do things I didn't know were going to be possible. So, another benefit of reusing other people's stuff. So, I've said linked open data everywhere is not appropriate, but I think for a kind of what I call a kind of national grid of infrastructure that underpins the kind of apps that are being talked about here, I think it's really worth looking at because the power of it is awesome, as they say. Finally, talk to us, come and find me, come and my colleagues, Colin, Dan, we're here. And also, if you've got any other suggestions of data sets you think would be worth working on, we would like to hear them. Is that it? Yes, it is. I pressed the right arrow and there's nothing more.
Q&A, get the hands up. Yeah. You were starting.
I'm learning a lot about the cooperative movement, the existence of the cooperative movement. The 7 principles of the international cooperative movement is another. Does anybody know, do you know if if the cooperative movement in the UK has a best practices principles guidelines for this data? Or is this something you're trying to move towards? Or?
Well, this work started out of Principle 6 of the cooperative movement is cooperation among cooperatives.
Among cooperatives, exactly. That's a good one.
I'm not aware of any existing guidelines.
Okay.
That doesn't mean say they don't exist.
Doesn't mean so.
Yeah.
Does anyone have a response to that who is more from the co-op side of things? Is that a response?
In a humorous opera at the ICA gathering in 2012, there was a pitch from some of the founders of this conference to make a Principle 8, which was use open source software as a Principle 8 for the co-op movement,
Right.
but it didn't get adopted.
Okay. So, did you have anything?
Yeah. Thank you both. It was a really great presentation and quite cathartic for me because we, in my organisation called Ethos, we do a lot of linked data stuff, linked open data and other data sets. So 2 of the projects is we have parking data. So we are the largest publisher of real-time parking data, over 2 million parking spaces. So if you want to find out car parking spaces for the co-ops, then it's another Sparkle query you could do.
Idea for data sets.
Another project that we do is looking at construction industry and the fact that there's 180,000 jobs short in London. So we're looking at all the further education colleges surfacing their forecast supply and all the construction companies forecasting their demand. But what I've found in the last 7 years in my organisation doing this is that there's a big bit about the piece you're saying, encouraging people to share. So it's about going to all the further so just publish your courses in RDF or linked data. So my question, it kind of feel like I'm Alcoholics Anonymous a bit, is that how do we collaborate a little bit more with this community? Because we need all the linked data and all the collaboration help. We're a social enterprise, we're a worker-owned organisation, and I want to be part of that.
Yeah.
And I feel I didn't know that if you had this workshop, there's so much interest in it. So.
Well, I built an app for that. I think that, one of the barriers I found is that you talk to people, educate people, and sometimes they won't respond positively, and sometimes they do and go, right, what do I do next? And we're like, well, you need to build this platform and so on. So, and coming to this conference, personally for me, I think that app that should be coming live soon would perfectly suit a platform cooperative, because it is to get over those technical barriers that people find in publishing their data, and the resource barriers of, there's a lot of small organisations and individuals don't have the resources for running servers and so on. So that's a whole other conversation. But were the hands up there direct responses or more questions? Go ahead then.
So I was just going back on Cooperatives UK's data standards, and I was on the board of Cooperatives UK 10 years ago, when the Chief Operations Officer thought that the way forward as a business for Cooperatives UK was to privatise that data and sell it to companies, sell it to marketers. He honestly thought that was a business model for Cooperatives UK. So that's how bad it was 10 years ago. We've had massive debates within Cooperatives UK about the quality of the data that they have. So, I know I'm zone top, and I know whether they're actually a co-op or not. But I can see all sorts of potential for setting standards for primary cooperatives to report and open their own data in such a way, and it can cover all sorts of things. So you could have, for instance, a link between the database of cooperatives that carry the cooperative mark and use a .com domain name, which indicates that they're actually part of the movement.
Yeah, and
but there are problems with Cooperatives UK's data.
We've been talking to domains.com.
There is a session this afternoon, quite a large sort of workshop session about designing interoperable apps and stuff. And maybe we can come together in that and go, okay, we're here. Let's do it. Let's have a data standard. Right. Yep.
Is 100% openness always the right way? So it's about who has access to that data and what it's being used for.
Yeah.
So is there any case for saying, some of that data stay within the cooperative sector to give them the competitive edge?
Absolutely. I meant to say, I'm glad you reminded me, I'm using the term linked open data, but the same technology as linked data, it doesn't have to be open, and there are many examples where that's not a good idea. I mean, personal data is an obvious one. Yeah. So yes, but all the same advantage.
That license, how's it done through a licensing thing, or how is it?
So because all of this stuff is built on standard web technology, if you want to have a web server that isn't visible on the internet, it's exactly the same way you protect a linked data server that you don't want to be visible on the internet. So you're just reusing the same stuff that has been familiar for ages. That's the way you make it. Just
do you have a gatekeeper who decides who has access to it, who doesn't, or how?
There's all sorts of questions about how you make those decisions. Some of it's obvious. If it's personal health data, you don't make it open. And there are, of course, there's a sliding scale, thank you, of grey areas.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of echo really what had been said already, but for me it seems like there's a really obvious step that could be taken, which is coming up with a kind of agreed data schema for cooperative organisations to optionally, I guess, in the first instance, if there's some resistance, but just have that schema kind of like an open standard and adopt it. And I think there's a really strong rationale for it. And one of the main things I'd be keen to see is, I know that there's certain cooperative organisations who have a lot of spare cash, but obviously they can only put that into other cooperative organisations. And then there's other startup co-ops who want cash to get going. And I think there's a bit of there's a massive gap there in linking those two things together. And the beauty of co-ops is that there's financial transparency, and that's something that should be, celebrated and, in terms of open source, be continued to develop. And I think if you could have the sort of linked data approach to the financial information, that's where it becomes incredibly powerful, because it can build scale for the cooperative movement in a way that it hasn't had to date. And so I think it should be a priority of the cooperative movement to develop these kind of data schemas, including financial information.
So what I found was that we were interested in modelling initiatives within the solidarity economy, and lo and behold, someone had already done good work on that. Yeah, ESS Global is the name of the vocabulary, and that's what we use. So again, we found we didn't need to invent something new.
What is ESS Global?
So it was funded by RIPES, RIPES Europe. I'll tell you later.
Okay.
So they were going to go down. I think.
But is it an open standard? Is it like a?
Oh yeah.
So it gets evolved.
I mean, it hasn't been adopted by any standards agency. But
it's a taxonomy rather than the linked open data.
There's a vocabulary. It's an application profile.
Final question.
Hi. So the solidarity economy is, as you say, a grassroots movement that's building a fair and ecological alternative to capitalism. You've talked about linked open data as a sort of useful tool that the Institute has, drawn on, but I'm wondering whether there's been any kind of interest from the open data developer community in your political and economic project, or whether it's just been, you using open data as a useful tool. That is, like, whether the open data community has any interest in and is showing, interest in participating in the solidarity economy movement.
Okay, so we have only just started making this work. This is the first time anyone's talked about it in a public space. So at the moment, no. But watch this space, I don't know. Yeah.
All right then.
I just want to make a comment because of the access control part. You can go to webid.info/spec or just webid.info, and that will point to W3C webpage, which has lists of access. How can you do resource-based access control, global identity using technology in the browser, and other pointers. So you can actually have access control per resource, where resources could say the friends of my friends could have access to this, where the friends have profiles and servers remotely, or you could have some parts of the co-op data be accessible only to other co-op members or things like that. These are very, very general rules. So there's prototypes for how to do that, and actually there needs to be more work, actually finally W3C work going through standardizing this and so on. But it's really quite...
Yeah, I must talk to you more about that. So I think for the sake of the next people coming into this room, are due to be here in a few minutes.
Yeah, they need to start that 3 minutes.
So,
thank you very much, everyone.